The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Kum lech el Nineveh, ha'ir hagdolah. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. Jonah, however, started out to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's service. He went down to Jaffa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from the service of the Lord. Jonah did not merely run away on a ship going anywhere. He wanted a ship going to Tarshish. Tarshish is mentioned 3 times in one verse, prodding the reader to wonder, where is Tarshish? And why was Jonah so desperate to flee there? Tarshish is mentioned in the book of Yechezkel and Ezekiel, in a chapter dedicated to sailors and merchants who plied the high seas. Scholars believe it may have been an ancient city where King Solomon mined metals, a considerable source of his wealth. It was a place of a mighty sailing fleet, as we learn in the book of Kings. All King Solomon's drinking cups were of gold, and all the utensils of the Lebanon forest house were of pure gold. Silver did not count for anything in Solomon's days, for the king had a Tarshish fleet on the sea, along with Hiram's fleet. Once every 3 years the Tarshish fleet came in, bearing gold and silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Solomon's business relationship with Tarshish and his dominance over it was well established, as reflected in the book of Psalms. Let kings of Tarshish and the islands pay tribute. Kings of Sheba and Seba offer gifts. Let all kings bow to him and all nations serve him. It's not hard to imagine one of King Solomon's ships docking in Jaffa and emptying out its treasures for use in the king's building projects. Tarshish was not a city that kept its wealth to itself. Many verses that mention Tarshish do so in relation to its fleets, acknowledging a market dominance when it came to high-status bartering and business. Tarshish traded with you because of your wealth of all kinds of goods. They bartered silver, iron, tin, and lead for your wares. It's also used as a term to refer to a precious gem, one located in the high priest's breastplate, possibly mined in this eponymous location. It experienced as these sailors and merchants were, they too suffered storms that tested their expertise, making the storm that tossed Jonah's ship a credible occurrence. At the mere sight of it, they were stunned, they were terrified, they panicked, they were seized with a trembling, like a woman in the throes of labor, as the Tarshish fleet was wrecked in an easterly gale. If a Tarshish boat could capsize, then this sight must have been truly wondrous. In sum, Tarshish was known in the ancient world for its captivating wealth, its merchant ships, and the hardiness of its sailors. It's not hard to understand why a rebel prophet would pick this city. Jonah did not arbitrarily pick any ship traveling to facilitate a swift getaway. Jonah started out to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's service. He went down to Jaffa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from the service of the Lord. Tarshish was a location of choice before Jonah arrived in Jaffa, almost as if he told himself, this son of a prophet, if God ever calls me again, I have a place to which I will escape. He then found a ship going in this direction and paid the fare to go there. One might conclude from a survey of biblical verses about Tarshish that Jonah selected this location because of the reputation of its fleet and sailors. To ensure that he would really get away from the creator of the entire universe, he needed to rely on the very best at sea. But this would emphasize the journey over the destination, while the text stresses the final port. Pitting Tarshish against Nineveh in Jonah's mind takes the reader back to Genesis 10, where both are mentioned as offshoots of Noah's children who spread out to repopulate the world. Tarshish was a great-grandson of Noah's son Japhet. The descendants of Yavan, Elisha, and Tarshish, the Kittim and the Dodanim, from these maritime nations branched out. As early as Genesis, Tarshish, the person, was associated with Tarshish, the place, a locus of maritime interest. Nineveh, in contrast, was a city created by the descendants of Ham, whose children and grandchildren spread out across Babylonia and Assyria. Quote, "From that land Asher went forth and built Nineveh, Rehoboth Ir, Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city." Noah's son Ham saw Noah naked in his tent and exposed his vulnerability. It is little surprise that Nineveh, a descendant of Ham, was associated with immorality. The early chapters of Genesis make Jonah's decision an almost primordial choice between the age-old city of Nineveh and the age-old city of Tarshish. Having oneself thrown into the sea suggests that Jonah was ultimately willing to lose himself in a place of no boundaries, no name, and no history. The scholar James Ackerman calls Nineveh and Tarshish two geographic antipoles. Nineveh to the east is the later capital of Assyria, the very nation that would destroy and carry off Jonah's people, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom 60 years later. The Assyrians were renowned for their power and gross cruelty, and allusions in our story recall the flood and the judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. Thus, we know Nineveh as a city whose power is a threat to Israel's existence and whose evil is antithetical to God's will. Tarshish, on the other hand, lies somewhere in the far west, where God was not known. Strangely, Tarshish also connotes luxury, desire, delight. For Jonah, therefore, Tarshish may paradoxically represent a pleasant place of security that borders on non-existence. We understand and have abundant textual evidence that Tarshish was associated with goods of an almost mythic nature. But is there any rationale for believing, as Ackerman states, that it was a city where God was not known? Jonah escaped God by going to a city where he thought there was no God. We have only one biblical proof text that suggests this reading, a verse in the very last chapter of Isaiah. Quote, "The time has come to gather all the nations and tongues. They shall come and behold my glory. I will set a sign among them and send them survivors to the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, that draw the bow, to Tubal, Yavan, and the distant coasts, that have never heard my fame nor beheld my glory. They shall declare my glory among these nations." Tarshish was regarded as a distant place, so distant, in fact, that its residents were unaware of the presence of Israel's one God. In the future, Isaiah predicted that these remote nations would come to know God and articulate God's glory. Yitzhak Berger, in his book Jonah in the Shadows of Eden, regards Tarshish not as the material center of the ancient Near East, but as a kind of mythic paradise, replete with abundant riches. All of the locations that the prophet seeks out or occupies, Berger contends, evoke suggestive associations with a divine abode reminiscent of Eden. He suggests that Jonah was not merely running away, but running towards this destination, to attain the idyllic beauty of a kind facilitated and signified by ships of Tarshish that characterizes the exquisitely Aden-like kingdom of Tyre. Berger extends this description to the belly of the fish, which he regards as not merely a source of bliss, but also an Eden-like abode. He also believes that Jonah's kikayon, his gourd, embodies an Edenic domain, which explains why Jonah is crestfallen when the plant withers. A prophet in search of Eden despairs when associations with that Garden of Eden are compromised and lost. In choosing Tarshish, Jonah was in effect telling God and confirming to himself that he wanted a material life of wealth and comfort over a life of spiritual service and hardship. By selecting a city of luxury with little spiritual promise, Jonah was telling God he was uninterested in reforming a wayward city. He was interested in cities with gold and silver and precious stones. He could easily lose himself in such a place that represented the opposite ideals and demands of an Israelite prophet. What constitutes a rebellion against God may not be a direct confrontation, but an indirect escape to a place where God seems absent. Where do we disappear to when we want to escape responsibility? when we run away from who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. Put more prosaically, if you were to run away, would you choose a place associated with sin or a place associated with pleasure? Reading the book of Jonah on Yom Kippur invites us to contemplate our own escape routes. What we might find upon self-reflection is that the opposite of spirituality is not always sin, but shallowness. We all have a Tarshish. It may be the mall, it may be the internet, it may be a cell phone, it may be a TV, it may be a preoccupation with having things. We gravitate to Tarshish because Nineveh demands so much from us. Only when Jonah was at risk of it all, at the very bottom of the sea, did he recalibrate his true direction. I thought I was driven away out of your sight. Would I ever gaze again upon your holy temple? There is Nineveh, there is Tarshish, and then there's the holy temple in Jerusalem. Nineveh is a place of sin. Tarshish is a place of shallowness. Jerusalem is a place of holiness. Yom Kippur invites us to contemplate the direction we're moving towards in the year ahead, because it's not only about the journey, it's also about the destination.